Good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And this morning I'm doing a bit of a deep dive on a man named James Bryant Conant, C-O-N-A-N-T. James Bryant Conant was the president of Harvard University at the time that my father uh, was a student there from 1938 to 1942. Hello, Tyrone. How are you? And Corky? Good to see you. Ice finally melting. That's good. Yeah, I'm going to be able to get out today. Our street looks pretty clear. Yesterday was quite a mess, but nice to have a little bit of winter before we move on to spring. But hey, let's move on. I'm ready for spring. Bring it. Yeah, see my little birdie guys there. They're cold. They're huddled around the fire there, and I don't blame them. I let them stay inside as long as they want to. They spent the winter with me, and I'm pretty impressed by that. Especially, Grimsey over here. He's been staying with me since we were in Iceland. He stowed away in our luggage on the way back, and I think he just wants to be with us, with me and Drummer. So, but he's not used to this kind of staying inside all the time, and I don't know. I hope we can bring him back to Iceland one day. Anyway, that's our birds this morning. Everybody's nice and warm here inside, and all the birds outside. Of course, my wife put out a whole bunch of bird seed for them this morning, so they're all very, very happy. Why James Bryant Conant? Who is he? Why is he important? Well, I submit to you that he is one of the hidden hands of the 20th century that has formed our culture as much as he's formed the minds of students at Harvard. And that's why I want to spend a little time talking about him. He was born in Dorchester, Massachusetts, 1893. So he is a contemporary of my grandfather, and that makes him about 26, 7 years older than my father. So he's just that one generation older, like the parent generation for McDuff. And I know suet is a hit, Corky, but you have to keep replacing it, don't you? You have to keep going and getting more because they eat it up right away. I tell you what, let me have a sip of coffee. So here's why I think James B. Conant is worth studying today, because he was, after World War II, important in shaping President Truman's policies in terms of both race relations and the use of the atomic bomb. As you know, when when President Franklin D. Roosevelt died, and we're suspicious about that death. Harry Truman became the president, and Harry Truman was a guy that was, a high-level Freemason, had come up in a political machine in Missouri, and was somebody that would go along to what the majority or what the people around him wanted him to do. And one of those people around him was James B. Conant, the president of Harvard. And it was through Conant's advice that a number of important steps were taken by President Truman that have shaped our country to this day. James B. Conant, I should mention, has a granddaughter who wrote a biography of him, which is definitely something I would like to read. Haven't read it. It's 500 pages long, and I'm probably not going to get to it in the near future. But there's some great summaries of his work, and one of them is by a person named Claire Spark, who has a blog at the Claire Spark blog. And I'm going to read a little bit from her blog about ethnopluralism. What is ethnopluralism? Ethnopluralism could direct and absorb the class resentments of the potentially explosive, redundantly educated, quote, the disillusioned worker or petit bourgeois, the overtrained in technology and underemployed in the Depression, who had been spotted by by other conservative intellectuals as shock troops for fascism between the wars. What is this talking about? Um, it often happens nowadays. This is quoting from the historian Friedrich Meinecke. It often happens nowadays that young technicians, engineers, and so forth who have enjoyed an excellent university training as specialists will completely devote themselves to their calling for 10 or 15 years, and without looking either to the right or to the left, will try only to be first-rate specialists. Will completely devote themselves to their calling. But then, in their middle or late 30s, something they've never felt before awakens in them. Something that was never really brought to their attention in their education. Something that we would call a suppressed metaphysical desire. Then they rashly seize upon any sort of ideas and activities, anything that is fashionable at the moment, and seems to them important for the welfare of individuals, whether it be anti-alcoholism, agricultural reform, eugenics, or the occult sciences. The former first-rate specialist changes into a kind of prophet, into an enthusiast, perhaps even into a fanatic and monomaniacal. Thus arises the type of man who wants to reform the world. Here one sees how a one-sided training of the intellect in technical work may lead to a violent reaction of the neglected irrational impulses of the spirit, but not to a real harmony of critical self-discipline and inner creativeness, rather to a new one-sidedness that clutches about wildly and intemperately. A technical calling, however, does not necessarily precede the world reformer's intemperance. Men with hot heads, ambition, and an autodidactic urge for advancement, when forced into technically normalized working conditions of the present day, may easily lose their inner equilibrium in the conflict of the spirit with the world about them and flare up in a blaze. The petty painter and quarrelist Hitler, who once had to earn his scanty bread in construction work, and in the course of it whipped up his hatred of the Jews into a general philosophy of world-shaking consequences, is a case of this kind. The transition from what he calls, and this is Meinecke, Homo sapiens, the wise man, to Homo faber, the man who makes things, we had lost the integrative power of religion. There was no specific spiritual force, but a spiritual need springing from and existing from the totality of the soul, and called upon to preserve the inner community of the life of men and to knit the ties between the single working man and the cultured man of developed individuality. Okay, a lot of gobbledygook, and I've been accused of speaking gobbledygook before. I try to straighten it out in the course of my Mindfields, my wandering a little bit. But yeah, thanks, B. That's kind of what we're trying to say, the adult manifestation of counterdependency. I like that. What we're saying here is that people recognized that an education that is only technical in nature is going to be troublesome for the human spirit after 10, 15 years. You're going to realize that you're not being fulfilled, and you're going to reach out to try to understand the bigger picture of life, but you don't have time, you don't have the background, you don't have the education, and so you'll be swept up by something like the anti-Semitism of a Hitler, or perhaps the idea of global warming. So you see where I'm going with that is that we now have all of these different experts communities of experts, but we also have ethnic divisions. And it is my contention in this particular show of mine that this is what happened to eugenics, is that we created these servitors, but we did not ever do the melting pot that was promised to people from foreign countries to come here to study and become Americans. Well, no, you weren't allowed to do that. You were allowed to become a great Chinese physicist or a great Korean engineer or a great, African disease specialist or a great scientist in many different fields. But you were not allowed to be part of the big picture, the guiding star of the guiding light of our country was still under the control of the elites, the elites such as James B. Conant, the president of Harvard. Hey, David, I'm glad you're here. David puts out a lot of great stuff on Twitter. If you all haven't found out yet, if you aren't on Twitter, it's definitely worth it just to follow some folks like David Underdown, whose research is always interesting and helpful. There's a picture of James Conant as the United States High Commissioner for Germany in 1953. So here's what the theory of Claire Sparks amounts to, that the concept of ethnopluralism could redirect and absorb the class resentments of the potentially explosive, redundantly educated, that is, the disillusioned worker, overtrained in technology, but underemployed in terms of his spiritual needs. And here's what the idea was that they could kind of play everybody off against everybody else while retaining control over the economy, over the real direction of our country from behind by being in their own ethnocentric elite status. The people who kind of would have been the Morlocks in H.G. Wells's Time Machine, the ones that know the technology and can pull the levers and cause this or that to happen, as opposed to the rest of us who are basically happy little people that run around on the earth for short but happy lives and don't really know what's going on. Well, this idea of ethnopluralism is what's going to sustain that dream, so that instead of it being, well, there's the educated elites, the 1%, right? The ones that control all the money, the bankers and the industrialists and the people who understand how the world really works. And these are still like the Morlocks. They're still their own secret underground type of society. But all around them and all over the place are all these other ethnocentric pluralities, such as Muslims, or such as Jews, or such as environmentalists, people who have got that technical training in a certain field, but then see the world going to hell in a handbasket and say, I've got to fix things. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to look on the internet and find somebody that's trying to fix things. And then I'm going to say, oh, look, there's Greta Thunberg. She looks like she's trying to fix things. And let's look into her because her face is everywhere and she looks kind of interesting. So you pick up on somebody like that and you say, wow, they are way ahead of me. I'm going to follow them. Is that what happens to our liberal friends, our friends that have gone to Swarthmore and, and Dartmouth and Stanford and in UCLA, the folks that have got that tremendous education, but it's only a focused education. It's in, well, what they're looking at now is things as vague um, as social justice. You know, I have a degree in social justice. Well, what does that tell you? It just doesn't tell you anything except for that you recognize that the world is not just, and you have this desire to make it more just. Well, what are you going to do about that? You get a degree in social justice. Well, how does that help you? Does it make you a lawyer? No. Does it make you a cop or a civil, humanitarian or a great leader of civil reform movements? No. It just kind of fills your head with a whole lot of propaganda about how there's injustice between, say, white and black. So you say, oh, well, then that means we need to do something about it. Who's doing something about it? Oh, there's this group called Black Lives Matter. Well, I think Black Lives Matter. I think I'll support them. That sounds good. How does all this work in a coordinated fashion to keep us where we are today, to make us vulnerable to the ideas of a great reset, to make us vulnerable to the idea that the world is overpopulated? And the trouble is, it's not overpopulated. It's just that the techniques of governance right now involve creating scarcity by one company owning all of the water, all the gold, all of the copper, all of the uranium, all of the resources that are going to generate power. And the indication to me is that they're using ethnoplurality to play us all against each other while they still maintain that control from their Eastern and California control centers, controlling the economy and taking away from all of the citizens. My question is, what is so hard about all men are created equal? Why is that statement so controversial today? Well, it's because of people like James B. Conant, who started out in the poison gas business. Let's look at his Wikipedia before we go too much further with my philosophical minefield meandering. James Bryant Conant was an American chemist, a transformative president of Harvard University, and the first U.S. ambassador to West Germany after the war. He obtained a PhD in chemistry from Harvard in 1916. He served in the U.S. Army in World War I, working on the development of poison gases, especially lewisite, which is based on arsenic. And he became an assistant professor of chemistry at Harvard in 1919 and a full professor in 1929. He researched physical structures of natural products, including chlorophyll, and uh, wrote some chemistry papers, which I won't try to describe because I'm no chemist. Now, isn't it interesting that in 1933, Conant became the president of Harvard University? Think about all the things that happened in 1933, with especially the Nazi takeover of the German government. Well, he had a reformist agenda. He wanted to get rid of the requirement for taking Latin and get rid of some athletic scholarships. But he did impose the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, which was developed during the military to try to find the best minds and the worst minds, and to decide between them. So he is adopting the SAT and bringing that into our lives in the 1930s. Conant was appointed to the National Defense Research Committee in 1940, becoming its chairman in 1941. In that capacity, he oversaw vital wartime research projects, including the development of synthetic rubber and the Manhattan Project, which developed the first atomic bombs. He was present at the Trinity nuclear test at Alamogordo, the first detonation of an atomic bomb, and was part of the interim committee that advised President Harry S. Truman to use atomic bombs on Japan. After the war, he served on the Joint Research and Development Board that was established to coordinate burgeoning defense research and on the influential General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission. In the latter capacity, he advised the president against starting the development of the hydrogen bomb. His association with a chemist named Stanley Pinnock and Chauncey Loomis caused him to try to make some money with chemicals back in the 19-teens. Unfortunately, it was his fault that an explosion occurred and killed 3 people, including his partner Pinnock, back in 1916. He was at fault for that. Well, in World War I, he went to American University, which was not a university yet, but it was just owned and prepared as an university, but it was actually there for testing his poison gas shells. And I would imagine that there are still some of his mustard gas and other shells around American University as they continue to find them in historic digs around there, and probably quite dangerous too. As president of Harvard, he got rid of athletic scholarships, and I know my father had a scholarship, so it was an academic scholarship and not an athletic one, since there weren't any. Just a thing that we can understand. Now, I want to move on to June 1940 when he becomes the president of the National Defense Research Committee, because he was recruited. I mean, he was a member of it under Vannevar Bush. You guys know who Vannevar Bush is by now, right? He's the guy that at MIT is, he's the guy that is in charge of the Manhattan Project. And he was also the director of the Carnegie Institution of Washington. So since he works for the NRDC, he's really working for the Carnegie Institution. And I wonder, Andy, if you can get the picture of Conant at the at Bohemian Grove with all of the other Manhattan scientists, including Ernest Lawrence, Compton, Vannevar Bush, and Alfred Loomis, as they were making the plans for the Manhattan Project was done at Bohemian Grove. These are the elite of science that have gone together to create an atomic bomb. The idea that it could be made at all was shocking. And in fact, Vannevar Bush has been quoted as saying that he didn't think it would work. Nevertheless, Conant went to London, met with Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and became convinced that, yes, they could build a nuclear bomb. And it was as a result of the British program that Conant decided to go forward in America with the Manhattan Project. And then at the Quebec conference, the British and American projects basically merged, and that became the Manhattan Project, then later turned over to the Army under General Leslie Groves. Also interesting is the Buna. The Buna plant there's that picture of everyone and Conant is in the middle. So you see all of these incredible scientists, and where are they at? They are at Bohemian Grove, the famous place where Nixon said that was what did he call them? The faggiest group he'd ever been in. So who advised Truman to go ahead and drop the atomic bomb but James B. Conant and the committee around him? This is part of generally what I think is the idea that goes way back to H.G. Wells. If you go back and study his earlier writings, he was trying to project a time when there was a terribly murderous weapon that would be so horrible that nobody could ever conceive of using it, and that would lead to the one world government. That was the goal of the Fabians and all of those crazy people that still have this incredible shadow cast upon us. It is interesting that they were all at Bohemian Grove. Once again, after the war, Truman did not desegregate the troops, and in fact, Conant was opposed to desegregating the schools. He thought that all the groups could just continue to be separate. And that is the idea of ethnopluralism that I'm trying to project out this morning. That by giving everybody the idea that they belong to a certain group, that they won't feel like they have to be part of the national conversation. Okay, you're part of the Japanese American Chemical Association or something like that. You become a part of something that is tied to your ethnicity, so that they, in their ivory tower, can maintain their control over what's really going on, the actual economy and actual division of resources. So he becomes a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, along with John McCloy and so many of the other people that are around John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. In April 1951, Dean Acheson approached him as replacing John McCloy as U.S. High Commissioner for Germany. Then he announced that he would retire from the Harvard Board of Overseers and become that High Commissioner. The reunification of Germany was being talked about at the time, and Eisenhower was against it. Allied control of West Germany was necessary, and they brought it into NATO, and then the rearmament of Germany is all going on in the 50s, while Conant is the U.S. ambassador to West Germany. He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1959, where he was talking about reforming high schools into larger bodies that could offer a broader range of choices to the students. The idea was slammed, and he got nowhere with that. He also rejected busing in 1961 in his article Slums and Suburbs, in which he said Americans should accept de facto segregated schools. Okay, that's where he started falling out of favor. And while he was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1963, his influence started to wane, and along with his health. So, what do we say about James B. Conant here this morning on McDuff Lives? Well, he was a child of the eugenics era. He was somebody that created a weapon of mass destruction, the chemical gas lewisite, and the means to deliver it to destroy the enemy by the thousands and even hundreds of thousands. So we can understand that he's somebody that was concerned about the large body of uneducated humanity out there, just like John D. Rockefeller III was. And he was an intimate of the Dulles brothers and was in favor of their policies through the Eisenhower administration, basically to keep themselves in power, the Eastern elites, the ones that were the owners of the arms manufacturers like Remington and the owners of the great chemical companies like DuPont, the owners of the financing like Chase Manhattan Bank, the owners of Rockefeller, the Rockefellers themselves, and all of these folks that have created a society in which they can maintain their own hegemony and only take in such people as they think might be useful. And that's where my father comes in, is that here he is, growing up and going to public school in Hartford, Connecticut, and suddenly he's snatched out of public school and put into Loomis, the exclusive academy for the sons of the oil czars, as was put by Jim Mars in the book we read the other night, Population Control. And the intention was that he would become a servitor that would work for these Eastern elites, and he didn't want to do it. After the war, when he'd been through the war and had shipmates, 130 some shipmates killed, and over half of his ship was either killed or wounded in that kamikaze attack. It changes a person from somebody that might before the war have thought, okay, this is my way, this is my leg up. But after the war, to become more of a humanist generally, and to realize that, we're all created equal. We are. It's the truth, and we all are born with a natural affinity for humanity and to love one another. And that is what my father could not let go of, was his general love for humanity, and not to become somebody that would just focus on the technical aspects of how either to make a better chemical weapon or how to control uh, millions of people through economic means like George P. Shultz has done through his career, to be the economic hitman for all those great corporations. So my father became the guy that just wouldn't do it. He would not participate in that scheme. But it was the people like James B. Conant who grew up thinking that was the way to live, that we have to protect the intellectual people against the common people, the hoi polloi, the masses. As we've studied in studying the Guarded Gate by Daniel Okrent, Population Control, and so many other of our books that have just touched on this idea, that how do you get around the idea of all men are created equal? Well, you can go with Helen Blavatsky and say, well, no, there was all of these mystical periods in which there was this generation of humans and another generation of humans, and some of them ended up being the Nordic types, the smart ones that have figured all this out, and some of them are just never going to get anywhere because they're primitive. They're not intellectual. They are people that are going to be useless at best and harmful at worst, as they will belong to these ignorant groups. Corky Goss, thank you for saying that. John's message continues to gain clarity and power. It's hard. It is hard. I'm trying to say something that's very difficult, and I appreciate that encouragement very much, Corky. I'm just trying to say that our country has been controlled by the James B. Conants for too long. The idea that they could maintain their hegemony by playing black against white, or, Korean against black, or, just ethnic neighborhoods generally competing with each other, which takes their eye off of the hidden hands behind the scenes. And that's what we see in a James B. Conant. He was a um, an elitist, and there's really no way around that. This essay by Claire Spark, March 28th, 2011, I think is really um, April 12th, 2010 is the original one. It's really uh, got me thinking. Um, Here one sees how a one-sided training of the intellect in technical work may lead to a violent reaction of the neglected irrational impulses of the spirit, not to a real harmony of critical self-discipline and inner creativeness. A harmony of inner self-discipline and inner creativeness. That's what you need to be a Beethoven. That's what you need to be somebody that can persevere through the technical stuff, because you're trying to be creative, do something more important than just be a technical cog in a machine. This is the trap that I think that our liberal friends have fallen into, in that they've become experts in something, experts in the economy of Indonesia, or experts in the mating habits of ants, and by becoming more and more expert in a smaller and smaller subject area, they're losing part of their humanity. By losing part of your humanity, it grows on you, and so you become susceptible to the lures of a great reset. When Klaus Schwab shows up and says, "Hey, your normal is no good. Your old normal was full of ethnic conflicts and all kinds of tragedies, and we're going to have to get rid of your old normal and impose a new normal." A new normal based upon our values, our elite knowledge of how your mind works, and our elite ability to manipulate your mind so that you actually will do what we want you to do without you even knowing that you're doing what we want you to do. Becoming vulnerable to this is the price for paying for getting that great technical expertise that you get in college or in graduate school. Vulnerable to losing your reason, your ability to engage in real critical thinking. Isn't he ugly? He looks like he, I don't know. He's a very unattractive man. Um, Funny thing, he looks a little bit like Lyndon LaRouche too, doesn't he? They both are bald on the top and have that egg-shaped heads, eggheads, big, smart people. Lyndon LaRouche, a genius, but I think we have a lot of geniuses in our lives today, including Professor Hamamoto and George Webb, and a number of great researchers. I wouldn't exclude some of the folks in our chat room from that. What does this do to help us? Well, how does my study here of James B. Conant as the president of Harvard and the high commissioner in Germany, then the ambassador to West Germany, an advisor to Truman, and somebody who was opposed to desegregation, somebody who thought that it's best to leave us in our different communities. And why is that? Why? My thesis of this morning is that that is done in order to maintain control, where our Constitution says all men are created equal. The elite mind says, no, they're not. They're not capable of governing themselves. We have to do it for them, but we're going to fool them into thinking that they're doing it for themselves by creating this illusion of democracy. That's where our electoral system has gotten to now. I don't believe it. I don't believe the result of our recent presidential election. I don't believe it was true. I think there was all kinds of fraud that went on. And why? Well, so that people who shouldn't have control can maintain control. And the money that they're just sucking out of the average person on a daily basis is incredible. Now they want to borrow money and borrow money and borrow money for this or that relief. I see the next thing coming along is that the cities, the urban areas are now going to be lining up saying, give us, billions of dollars. Chicago needs money, Baltimore needs money. All these cities are going to say, well, we're broke. We need some money. So the federal government will then come in and give money to the cities, and who they're going to spend that money on? Not the people. No, they're going to spend it on the elites that already have money. They're going to be refunding their own schemes, their own failed banks will get a new injection of cash to keep that churn going, that continuing sense that everything's okay, because you're just taking the borrowed money from your left hand and spending it with your right hand, and you're doing it as fast as you can to keep it from crashing. Essentially, I think the idea of a Conant would lead us to what they won't call communism, but what really is basically a communist state where everyone is equalized in terms of you don't own anything, but we're providing you with what you need, so don't complain, right? Well, guys, I hope you found this interesting. It's been a little difficult for me to put together all these different ideas into what I think is an important concept, or else I wouldn't be sharing it with you. But the idea is that the generation that grew up with the eugenicists, these are the people that are born in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. They grew up in a world in which eugenicism was a good idea, and that there really were these unteamed, these teeming masses of unemployed and dirty, and you don't want to be around them people that are flooding into our cities, especially Boston, which we read about in The Guarded Gate, especially New York, especially places where the transportation hubs brought them in. And then the intellectuals who see them on the streets all the time are like offended, like how our culture can't survive. We're going to get pulled down by these ignorant, unwashed masses. Well, the reaction was worse than anybody could have expected, because that's where we get to ethnic cleansing, and that's where we get to a Holocaust. That's how we get to the idea that there are different qualities of humans. There are the great Nordic ones, and then there's the not so great Aborigines of Australia or Africa. Well, I don't want to go on forever with my theme. I just thought it was important this morning that I make this connection, and to kind of put down a marker that says I do believe that James B. Conant, the president of Harvard, appointed in 1933, when everything else is happening in 1933, from the bankers' rebellion with the DuPonts to the Hitler taking over in Germany, watershed of humanity that happened in 1933 led to the Holocaust, led to World War II. Recovering from World War II led to the imposition of new ethnopluralism, this multicultural idea that, hey, let's all coexist. You've seen that bumper sticker, right? That's what that bumper sticker means. You see the one that says coexist, and it's spelled out with a moon from the Islamic, and the star from the Jewish star, and the Christian T, and the idea of coexist. That's what James Conant stands for. Don't be a melting pot. Don't do what the Constitution says and give everybody the same rights. All men are created equal. That's the basis of our country. That's the basis of our morality. And we have to break down this idea that still exists, that there's something special about having Anglo-Saxon blood from the old British English families. There, that's that sign. Yeah, coexist. That is not the American dream. The American dream is all men are created equal. Men meaning, of course, mankind. And I'll leave it there for this morning. I'll see you guys tonight. And thanks for hanging in there, folks, that sometimes I have a hard time putting everything together, but I hope it's been at least somewhat successful to let you see what my opinion is that the reason that we can't get where we want to be is the lingering attitude of our elites that somehow they have got a better genealogical makeup than we do, that the rest of us do, and that they have the right and the duty even to control us by any means necessary. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day.